"Sir, there's been a mistake. This seat isn't for you." The words hit Marcus Williams like ice water. He stood frozen in the narrow aisle of Flight 847, his leather briefcase in one hand, and his first-class boarding pass in the other. The morning had started perfectly. Coffee with his wife at their penthouse overlooking the city skyline. A quick review of quarterly earnings that showed record profits. And now what should have been a routine flight to close the biggest deal in his company's history. Instead, he was staring into the cold eyes of flight attendant Sarah Martinez, whose perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the disdain written across her face. She stood like a human barricade between Marcus and seat 2A, her arms crossed in a gesture that screamed authority she didn't actually possess. Marcus Williams wasn't just any passenger. At 42, he had built Pinnacle Airlines from a tiny charter service operating out of a converted hangar into one of the nation's fastest-growing carriers. His Harvard MBA hung in his corner office alongside photos of him shaking hands with senators, governors, and Fortune 500 CEOs. He employed over 15,000 people, operated a fleet of 200 aircraft, and had personally revolutionized air travel for underserved communities across America. But none of that mattered now. All Sarah saw was a black man in an expensive suit who, in her mind, clearly didn't belong in first class. "I'm sorry. There must be some confusion," Marcus said, his voice carrying the calm authority of a man accustomed to boardroom negotiations worth millions. He held up his boarding pass, the letters 2A clearly visible in bold print. "This is definitely my seat." Sarah barely glanced at the pass, her dismissive attitude as obvious as a neon sign. "I don't think so. This section is reserved for our premium passengers. Perhaps you should check with gate services about your actual seat." "Assignment." Her voice dripped with that particular condescension. Marcus had encountered too many times throughout his life the tone that said, "You don't belong here," without using those exact words. The irony was suffocating. Here stood the man who had personally designed the first-class experience on Pinnacle Airlines, who had chosen the leather for these very seats, who had insisted on the extra legroom and premium amenities that made this cabin one of the industry's most sought-after flying experiences. And now he was being told he didn't belong in it. Around him, the carefully curated atmosphere of first-class luxury felt suddenly hostile. The other passengers, a mixture of business executives, wealthy retirees, and frequent flyers who had earned their upgrades, turned to watch the unfolding drama. Their expensive watches glinted in the cabin lighting as they lifted their phones, some pretending to check messages while actually recording what was clearly about to become a very uncomfortable situation. Marcus felt their stares burning into his back like spotlights. Whispers began to ripple through the cabin, passengers leaning toward each other to share their observations about the situation in 2A. He could practically hear their thoughts. How did he get up here? Did he steal someone's boarding pass? Should we call security? The weight of 2 centuries of racial prejudice pressed down on his shoulders. This wasn't just about a seat. It was about belonging, about recognition, about the fundamental right to exist in spaces he had literally created with his own vision and determination. "Ma'am, I assure you this is my correct seat," Marcus replied, maintaining his composure despite the volcano of anger building inside his chest. His voice remained steady, professional, dignified, exactly the way his grandmother had taught him to respond when the world tried to make him feel small. 20 years of business success flashed through his mind. The first small loan he'd secured to buy his initial aircraft, the nights spent sleeping in airport terminals while building his route network, the rejections from investors who couldn't see past his race to recognize his brilliant business plan. The moment Pinnacle Airlines had finally gone public, making him one of the youngest black CEOs in aviation history. None of it mattered now. All Sarah saw was his skin color, and that was enough for her to decide he was an imposter trying to steal a seat that didn't belong to him. The head flight attendant, James Richardson, approached with the swagger of a man who believed his uniform granted him ultimate authority. He was older, more experienced, with silver hair and the kind of confident stride that suggested he'd handled plenty of difficult passengers in his career. "Is there a problem here?" James asked, his eyes never quite meeting Marcus's, addressing his question to the air somewhere over Marcus's shoulder. This gentleman seems confused about his seating assignment, Sarah explained, her voice sweet as artificial honey. He's insisting that seat 2A belongs to him. James looked Marcus up and down with the practiced eye of someone who had already made his judgment. His gaze lingered on Marcus's Armani suit, his handcrafted Italian leather shoes, his platinum Rolex, as if searching for evidence that these expensive items were somehow fake or stolen. The inspection felt violating, like being strip-searched with someone's eyes. "Sir, I'm going to need to see your ID and boarding pass again," James declared with exaggerated authority. "We've had issues with people trying to upgrade themselves without authorization. You understand security protocols." The accusation hit Marcus like a physical blow. In that moment, decades of achievement evaporated. The Harvard scholarship, the venture capital he'd raised, the congressional testimony he'd given on aviation policy. None of it mattered. He was just another black man being accused of theft, of not belonging, of trying to take something that wasn't rightfully his. Around him, the atmosphere in first class had transformed into something resembling a Roman Colosseum. Passengers were no longer even pretending to mind their own business. Mrs. Henderson in 1B had her phone positioned perfectly to capture every moment, her manicured finger hovering over the record button. The businessman in 3A was live streaming to his social media, whispering commentary like a sports announcer calling a game. Even the elderly couple in the front row had turned completely around in their seats, watching the spectacle unfold with the fascination of people witnessing a car accident. "Here's my identification," Marcus said, his voice controlled despite the storm raging inside him. He pulled out his driver's license, the one that listed his address in the most exclusive neighborhood in the city, and handed it over along with his boarding pass. "And here's my boarding pass, which clearly shows seat 2A. James took the documents and made a production of examining them, holding them up to the light as if checking for watermarks on counterfeit currency. He squinted at the ID photo, then at Marcus, then back at the photo, as if the face of the man who had appeared on the covers of Forbes and Businessweek was somehow unfamiliar. James muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The documents appear to be legitimate, but we'll need to verify this with our ground crew. You understand? We can't just take anyone's word for it. These premium seats are reserved for our most valued customers, and we simply can't allow unauthorized individuals to occupy them. Anyone. Unauthorized individuals." The words hung in the recycled cabin air like toxic smoke. Marcus felt each term as a deliberate insult, coded language designed to question his right to exist in this space without directly invoking race. Behind him, a young woman whispered loudly to her companion, "I don't understand why he's making such a big deal. If there's a problem with his ticket, he should just move." Her companion shushed her, but the damage was done. The implication was clear. Marcus was the problem, the troublemaker, the one disrupting everyone else's peaceful flight experience. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Flight attendants, prepare for departure." The announcement seemed to amplify James's sense of urgency and authority. "Look, buddy," James said, his veneer of professionalism finally cracking completely. The word buddy dripped with condescension, the kind of false familiarity used to diminish and dismiss. "I'm going to be straight with you. We're holding up an entire aircraft full of people over what's probably just a computer glitch. Why don't you be reasonable and take a seat in coach? We'll sort this whole thing out once we're airborne. No harm, no foul." The suggestion felt like a punch to the gut. Move to the back of the plane. The historical echoes were deafening. Rosa Parks, the Montgomery bus boycott, generations of his ancestors who had been told exactly where they belonged and where they didn't. The painful irony wasn't lost on him, that he was being asked to move to the back of an aircraft owned by a company he had built from nothing. Behind him, a young woman whispered loudly to her companion, "I don't understand why he's making such a big deal. If there's a problem with his ticket, he should just move." Her companion shushed her, but the damage was done. The implication was clear. Marcus was the problem, the troublemaker, the one disrupting everyone else's peaceful flight experience. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Flight attendants, prepare for departure." The announcement seemed to amplify James's sense of urgency and authority. "Look, buddy," James said, his veneer of professionalism finally cracking completely. The word buddy dripped with condescension, the kind of false familiarity used to diminish and dismiss. "I'm going to be straight with you. We're holding up an entire aircraft full of people over what's probably just a computer glitch. Why don't you be reasonable and take a seat in coach? We'll sort this whole thing out once we're airborne. No harm, no foul." The suggestion felt like a punch to the gut. "Move to the back of the plane." The historical echoes were deafening. Rosa Parks, the Montgomery bus boycott, generations of his ancestors who had been told exactly where they belonged and where they didn't. The painful irony wasn't lost on him, that he was being asked to move to the back of an aircraft owned by a company he had built from nothing. "I understand you believe you're just doing your job," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying a dignity that the situation was trying desperately to strip from him. "But I am exactly where I'm supposed to be. I have done nothing wrong, and I will not be moving from my assigned seat." Sarah reappeared at James's shoulder, having apparently summoned backup. She carried a tablet, presumably to check passenger manifests, but her expression suggested she had already reached her conclusion. "Sir," she interjected, "we really need to resolve this situation. Other passengers are becoming uncomfortable, and we're delaying takeoff. Surely you can understand that we're just trying to maintain order and ensure everyone has a pleasant flight experience." The gaslighting was masterful. Somehow, Marcus had become responsible not just for the delay, but for the comfort of passengers who were enjoying the free entertainment of watching a black man being humiliated. He was the problem that needed to be solved, the disruption that needed to be managed. Marcus looked around the cabin one more time. Every face was turned toward him, some with curiosity, others with annoyance, a few with what might have been sympathy. But not one person spoke up in his defense. Not one passenger suggested that maybe, just maybe, the flight attendants were the ones creating the problem. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone, the same platinum iPhone that had closed billion-dollar deals and connected him with world leaders. For a moment, he simply held it, letting the weight of what he was about to do settle in his mind. This wasn't just about getting his seat anymore. This was about every black passenger who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong, who didn't have the power to fight back, who had been forced to accept humiliation in silence. "Actually," Marcus said, his voice carrying a new edge that made several passengers look up from their phones, "let me make a quick call to clarify this situation once and for all." The transformation in his demeanor was subtle, but unmistakable. Gone was the defensive posture of a man being accused. In its place stood the quiet authority of someone who had commanded boardrooms, negotiated with hostile takeover artists, and built an empire from scratch. His shoulders straightened, his jaw set, and something in his eyes shifted from hurt to determination. He speed-dialed a number he knew by heart. The phone barely rang once before a crisp professional voice answered. "Jennifer Chen speaking, Mr. Williams's office." "Jennifer, it's Marcus," he said, his voice carrying across the now silent first-class cabin. Every conversation had stopped. Even the flight attendants preparing for takeoff in the galley had gone quiet, sensing that something significant was happening. "I need you to connect me to the flight operations manager for Flight 847, departing from Gate 15, immediately. And Jennifer, make it clear this is priority one." Sarah and James exchanged glances for the first time that weren't filled with smug confidence. Something in Marcus's tone had shifted. The quiet, unshakable confidence of a man who knew exactly who he was and what power he wielded. The way he spoke wasn't the desperate plea of someone trying to talk his way into a seat he didn't deserve. This was the voice of someone giving orders he expected to be followed without question. "Right away, Mr. Williams," Jennifer responded, her voice audible to several nearby passengers. "I'll have Tom Bradley on the line within 30 seconds. James's face had begun to show the first cracks of uncertainty. "Sir, there's really no need to involve operations. We can handle this internally. Marcus held up a single finger, silencing him with a gesture so natural and authoritative that James actually stepped back. It was the kind of command presence that came from years of being the final decision-maker, the person everyone looked to when million-dollar problems needed solving. The phone rang, and Marcus answered immediately. "Tom, I hope I'm not interrupting anything critical." "Never for you, Mr. Williams. How can I help you this morning?" The voice of Tom Bradley, Pinnacle Airlines Senior Flight Operations Manager, carried clearly through the cabin's perfect acoustics. Acoustics that Marcus had personally approved during the aircraft's design phase. Marcus pressed the speaker button, ensuring every passenger and crew member could hear clearly. "Tom, I'm currently aboard Flight 847, and there seems to be some confusion about my seating assignment. The flight crew is questioning my right to occupy Seat 2A. Could you please verify my reservation status for everyone present?" The pause that followed lasted only 2 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. In that silence, Sarah's face began to pale, and James's confident posture started to crumble like a house of cards in a hurricane. "Mr. Williams," Tom's voice came through with crystal clarity. "You are confirmed in Seat 2A, First Class. Your reservation was booked personally by your assistant 3 days ago, and it's flagged as a VIP passenger in our system. Sir, is there some kind of problem I should be aware of?" The temperature in the cabin seemed to drop 10 degrees. Sarah actually took a step backward, bumping into the service cart. James's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no sound came out. Marcus looked directly at both flight attendants, his gaze steady and unwavering. "Actually, Tom, there is a significant problem. I need you to pull the complete crew manifest for this flight and send it to my personal email immediately. We're going to need to have a very serious conversation about customer service standards, discrimination policies, and what appears to be a fundamental failure in crew training." "Absolutely. Mr. Williams, I'll have that information to you within 2 minutes. Should I also notify the crew that you're on board?" "Sir, do you need me to speak with anyone specifically about this situation?" Around the cabin, passengers were now leaning forward in their seats, phones held high, capturing every word of what was clearly becoming a career-ending moment for the flight crew. The businessman in 3A was live-streaming to his 10,000 followers, whispering commentary about witnessing the most epic corporate takedown in aviation history. Marcus looked directly at James and Sarah, both of whom now appeared to be having the worst realization of their professional lives. Their faces had gone from condescending confidence to dawning horror as the pieces began falling into place. "I think they're about to figure out exactly who I am, Tom," Marcus said, his voice carrying a mixture of disappointment and steel. "But yes, please do notify them officially. It seems there's been a rather significant breakdown in communication." As Marcus ended the call and settled into his rightfully assigned seat, the silence in first class was deafening. He opened his laptop with deliberate calm, the soft click of the keyboard keys the only sound in a cabin where 30 seconds earlier, conversations and judgments had flowed freely. The other passengers sat frozen, suddenly aware they had witnessed something far more significant than a simple seating dispute. Sarah stood motionless in the aisle, her hands trembling slightly as the full weight of her actions began to sink in. The confident flight attendant who had blocked Marcus's path just minutes earlier now looked like someone who had accidentally stepped off a cliff. Mrs. Henderson in 1B gasped audibly as she read his biography. "Oh my God," she whispered to her husband. "He's the founder of this entire airline. He's literally our boss's boss's boss." The businessman in 3A was still live streaming, his followers now numbering in the tens of thousands as word spread across social media. "Folks, I cannot believe what I'm witnessing," he whispered into his phone. The CEO of Pinnacle Airlines was just racially profiled by his own employees. "This is about to become the biggest story in corporate America." Sarah finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. She approached Marcus's seat like someone walking to their own execution. "Excuse me, sir, Mr. Williams, we had no idea who you were. If we had known—" Marcus looked up from his laptop, where he was already composing what would become the most important email of several people's careers. His expression was calm, almost serene, but his eyes held the weight of profound disappointment. "That's exactly the problem, Sarah," he said, reading her name tag with deliberate emphasis. "Your treatment of me shouldn't depend on who I am. Every passenger who boards this aircraft deserves the same respect and dignity, regardless of their race, their appearance, or what assumptions you might make about their background." The words hit the cabin like shockwaves. Other passengers nodded in agreement, some looking ashamed that they had sat silently during the discrimination, others pulling out their phones to document this moment of corporate reckoning. James materialized beside Sarah, his face now the color of ash. His hands were visibly shaking as he struggled to form words. "Mr. Williams, I don't know what to say. This is a terrible misunderstanding. I've been with the company for 12 years and I would never intentionally—" "But you did," Marcus interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had built a billion-dollar empire from nothing. "You made assumptions based solely on how I looked, and you acted on those assumptions without hesitation. You accused me of theft, questioned my integrity, and suggested I was trying to steal something that didn't belong to me. That tells me everything I need to know about how you treat other passengers who share my skin color." The cabin had become a classroom, and Marcus Williams was delivering the most expensive lesson these flight attendants would ever receive. Passengers leaned in to hear every word, understanding they were witnessing a pivotal moment in corporate accountability. Sarah's tears began flowing freely now. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Williams. I never meant for this to happen. I was just following protocol. I thought I was doing my job." "Your job," Marcus said firmly, "is to ensure every passenger feels welcome and respected. Your job is to provide excellent service without prejudice. Your job is to represent this company's values, which clearly state that discrimination of any kind is not just unacceptable, it's grounds for immediate termination." The other flight attendants had gathered at a respectful distance, watching their colleagues' careers implode in real time. They exchanged horrified glances, each probably wondering if they had ever made similar assumptions, if their own unconscious biases had created moments like this. Marcus continued typing, his fingers moving with the precision of someone who had drafted countless termination letters, merger agreements, and policy changes. "I'm documenting this entire incident," he said without looking up, including the names of everyone involved, witness statements from passengers, and my personal observations about systematic failures in our hiring and training processes. 10 minutes after takeoff, Marcus had completed the most consequential email in Pinnacle Airlines' corporate history. The subject line read simply, "Immediate termination required. Discriminatory conduct by flight crew, Flight 847. But the content was anything but simple. It was a masterclass in corporate accountability, detailing every moment of discrimination with legal precision while maintaining the moral authority of someone who had built his company on principles of equality and respect. He attached the incident report, complete with timestamps and direct quotes, video evidence from passengers who had captured the entire encounter on their phones, written statements from first-class travelers who had volunteered to serve as witnesses, their contact information included for follow-up interviews, and his formal recommendation for immediate disciplinary action against all crew members involved. The email didn't just go to human resources. Marcus copied the entire executive board, the company's legal department, the chief diversity officer, and the head of corporate communications. This wasn't going to be swept under the corporate rug or handled with a quiet reprimand. This was going to be a teachable moment that resonated throughout every level of the company. By the time the aircraft reached cruising altitude at 35,000 feet, Marcus's phone was buzzing with responses. The first call came from Rebecca Martinez, Pinnacle's chief human resources officer. Her voice tight with barely controlled anger, not at Marcus, but at the situation he had been forced to endure. "Marcus, I just finished reading your report, and I am absolutely mortified," she said, her words coming fast and heated. "This is exactly the kind of behavior that violates everything we stand for as a company. We've reviewed the supporting evidence, including the passenger videos, and frankly, I'm shocked at the blatant nature of this discrimination." "Rebecca, I want this handled swiftly and completely," Marcus replied, his voice carrying the weight of both personal hurt and corporate responsibility. This isn't just about me. This is about every passenger who looks like me, who might not have the power to fight back, who might just accept this treatment because they don't see any other choice. We're implementing immediate termination procedures for all involved crew members, Rebecca confirmed. Sarah Martinez, James Richardson, and the 2 crew members who stood by and watched without intervening, they're all done. We cannot and will not tolerate this behavior. But Marcus wasn't finished. I want this to become a learning moment for our entire organization. Schedule mandatory bias training for every single customer-facing employee within 30 days. Partner with civil rights organizations to develop the curriculum. And Rebecca? I want this incident used as a case study in our training materials, with my permission and participation. The captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing their descent into Chicago. But for the crew members whose careers were about to end, the real descent had already begun. Rebecca was already coordinating with airport security, ensuring that terminated employees would be escorted off the aircraft immediately upon landing. As the plane touched down at O'Hare International Airport, Marcus could see through his window that this wasn't going to be a normal arrival. Airport security vehicles were positioned near the gate, their lights flashing. News vans from local stations had somehow gotten wind of the story and were setting up outside the terminal. Social media had done its work. The pinnacle discrimination was already trending nationwide. When the aircraft door opened, it wasn't just passengers who were met by ground crew. Airport security officers boarded immediately, carrying termination letters signed by Rebecca Martinez and witnessed by the company's legal department. Sarah Martinez was the first to be escorted off, her face streaked with tears, her career in aviation effectively over. James Richardson followed, his 12 years of service ending in the most humiliating way possible. As Marcus deplaned, he was approached by several passengers who had witnessed the entire ordeal. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman from 1B, took his hand gently. "Mr. Williams, I want you to know that what they did was disgusting and wrong. But watching you handle it with such grace and turn it into something meaningful, that was truly inspiring. You didn't just stand up for yourself. You stood up for everyone who's ever been treated that way." The businessman from 3A, whose live stream had been viewed by over 2 million people, approached with his phone still recording. "Sir, would you be willing to make a statement? The whole world is watching this story unfold." Marcus paused, considering his words carefully. What happened today reminded me why representation matters in leadership positions. If I hadn't been the CEO, if I had just been any other black passenger, this discrimination would have gone unpunished and unreported. We must do better as a society, and as a company, we will do better. The story exploded across social media within hours. Justice at 30,000 feet became the top trending topic worldwide. Pinnacle Airlines' stock initially dipped as news of the discrimination spread, but then soared to record highs as investors and customers praised Marcus's leadership and the company's swift, decisive action against workplace discrimination. At the company-wide meeting the following Monday, Marcus addressed 15,000 employees via video conference. This incident has shown us that our work toward equality and inclusion is far from finished. But it has also shown us the power of accountability, swift action, and turning pain. The terminated crew members attempted to file wrongful termination lawsuits, but their cases were dismissed when video evidence and witness testimonies made their discrimination undeniable. Their story became a cautionary tale taught in business schools and diversity training programs across the country. The lesson was clear and undeniable. Respect costs nothing, but disrespect can cost everything: your job, your reputation, and your future.